Hey everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. It's the final batch today of unread books from my collection where I'm reading the first chapters. So I'm 4 batches down. I've got the final batch of 6 books left today. These are unread books from my collection where I've not sampled the first chapter before, I've not read a previous book in the same series or anything along those lines. So these are all brand new books in brand new series for me. The final batch, as I say, 6 books. I've got some real classic stuff in here, starting off with The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. It's a very different writing style having such an old, such an old book. That makes it sound ancient, but in comparison to a lot of the books here, this is one of the oldest certainly, and you can really tell the style difference. It's a lot more in depth, it's a lot less action driven, although that's not necessarily a sign of the times. It's specifically for this one though. We start with this one. You've got a young boy who's he's not a shepherd, he's a blacksmith's son, but he's out kind of herding goats basically, and it's seen that he can call to the goats. He seems to have some sort of power over them. So his aunt, who is a witch of some description, sees this and she begins to teach him some things, basically the name of things, so he can call down a hawk, for instance. And he's got, as he's growing older, up to the point of 13, at the end of the opening chapter, he has various people who try to take him on as apprentices and things like that. There's a little bit of a battle because some raiders, but some soldiers come to raid the village that the character lives in, and he basically sees an opening. There's a little bit of mist and he's been taught some magic over the mist. He calls the mist and he shapes it to his will basically, and pretty much hides all of the villagers, and he gets them in on it, and they go around basically attacking these hunters, these warriors, using the mist as cover, so that they're all fine basically, and they survive the day. A wizard then comes, having heard about this, comes down to the village and says basically when the child is 13 on his name day, he will give him his name and take him as his apprentice. So that's all that we get here. It's kind of an up and down one because it sounds quite interesting, but it's a very different style. It's not one that I'm as used to anymore, because most of the books that I've been reading recently have been a bit more modern, but it's still an interesting opening chapter. I'm going to move on to one that is on my 2024 plan next. This is A Court of Broken Knives by Anna Smith-Spark. I've not read any of her writing. I've heard that it's very flowery. I'm not sure how I'll get on with that, but I'm about to find out. I'm not sure if I would call that flowery. Probably efficient is what I'd go for. There are very short sentences for a lot of them. Sentences that other writers would flesh out a little bit more with some additional words that aren't necessarily necessary, but would more commonly be seen, the sentences would more commonly be seen with them. It's not a problem here because it's a style choice and it works if you're good at it. And you know, from one short chapter, it seems like there's no problem there. There's a battle here. There's a chap who is unnamed. He's fighting basically, and there's not a lot more to it. It's just going through the battle. He then gets stuck basically with a blade, and there's he turns around and it's a wraith who's basically killing him. So he's seen some humour in this. He's saying, "You're dying and you're killing me. That's great. Thanks very much for that." And then this kind of heavenly figure appears, and he's got a flaming sword, a blue flame on his sword, and he's kind of a god figure, and people are chanting. And although he's dying, the character we're kind of following is cheering for him, and he's feeling refreshed and he's feeling healed. I'm not sure whether he is healed or not, but yeah, basically this heavenly figure fights a dark figure, and then it looks like we're back to fighting again. So it's a bit of a different one. The kind of train of thought, I guess, with those really efficient short sentences, some of them are a little bit weird. It almost seems semi-psychotic. Keep killing, keep killing, keep killing till we're all dead, as 3 sentences there, and things like that. And there's it's repeated a few times, that kind of, not necessarily that mantra, because it does change up a bit, but that kind of writing there, that kind of thought process. So it puts you in a very specific situation within the head of the person that you're following there. It's an interesting opening. I do love the floppiness of this book. It feels really nice in the hands as well, as another little advantage there. I'm not sure on the cover, it almost looks like it's a burning sword, but in the book it's a blue burning sword. So I'm not saying it's the same one, but just something that I did pick out there. Next up, we go into a big beastie of a book. This is Dragon's Reach by J.A. Andrews. It's the Keeper Origins book one. I know there's a couple of series that are linked together here, and this one is Keeper Origins. I think we've got, yeah, there's a prologue here with no page numbers on it, and then it goes to chapter 1. So I will read the prologue, which is entitled Smoke. There were some interesting elements in here that were a little bit understated. There's not really too much of the opening chapter. You get 2 scenes basically. You have some children who are picking berries basically, and then they realise that there is smoke in the air and it's the village being burned down. There are raiders. So second book in this batch so far where that happens. They go to the village basically, and the main character, who we see in the opening at least, her parents are trying to shield her. They're trying to keep her safe, so they put her in the cellar, and mother's got a bow which was described previously just randomly as an elven bow or elvish bow, and father's got a sword that the little girl has never seen before. The bit that I thought that was interesting is there seems to be an element of magic in here. I thought it was a bit odd first time it was mentioned, because she asks her father, why are they here? And he says he doesn't know, and it's a lie. And we know this because her reaction to it says the words cut across her like a cold knife. And I thought that was a little bit odd, but then over the page there's then something else that is said, and it says that the child can feel the warmth of the truth, or something along those lines. Feel the warmth in the words because they are true. And then a third time there is something that is said and she can feel the warmth of it. So it feels like, or it sounds like she feels warmth for truth and cold for a lie, which is quite interesting, and depending on obviously how often it comes up and how it's used, could be an interesting element in here. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, because it seems like at the end of it there are maybe some other villagers who are coming to help, because there are further arrows that start coming out of the air and into the raiders, but it looks like Mum and Dad have been killed, and whilst the cavalry, I suppose, is coming, the little girl is crawling over to her parents basically and finding them dead. So I'm not sure who's going to win the day, so to speak, but it's an interesting opening with some interesting elements in it. Doesn't give too much away, but it's definitely one that has a nice little hook in there. Another big book, I think this one's bigger and it's certainly heavier. This is Kingfall by David Estes. I first read of his writing in the first book that I picked up for this series of videos actually, which was Demon's Reign, co-written by Bengali. So with it being a co-written book, I don't know who was involved or whether they were both involved specifically in that first chapter, but I will call this my first taste of David Estes writing proper. The rain is made of starshine and misery, it opens. That's poetic. That was interesting and unexpected. So we've got a blind prince who's 17 years old and he's down a mine shaft. Basically there's a something called Magnum, I think it was, which is the only thing that he can see, although see is not quite described as being the right word. He can kind of sense it, but that's literally it. Everything else is darkness to him. So he's there with his longtime advisor and friend. They're talking about various tests that this friend has placed on him, basically. So he mentions, as they're walking through this tunnel in the earth, mentions putting up wooden supports to protect from cave-ins, and the advisor says that they don't need to do that. These tunnels have been here for ages. They'll stay up. And through talking about it, it turns out that that's a test, because he says yes, no amount of this material, this magnum, is worth a single man's life, basically. Anyway, they're not finding any of this stuff. They've been told that there's loads of it down there. They decide to use mage powder, I think it was, to basically, it's like dynamite, to blow up a big patch of it and try and find this vein of magnum. So they do that, and then something comes out. Basically, it's like something comes out of the deep, but it's actually the foreman of the miners. So whether something has taken over him or whether he was always like that, who knows? But he goes through and kills everyone, basically. But while he's doing this, the blind prince can kind of see what's going on. He can see the sword that this foreman is wielding and is able to stop him, and then he picks up the sword and he realises that essentially, I guess, whilst he's holding it and it seems moulded to his grip, he can actually see, which is a little bit weird. It's described as a god blade. He's saying that there are light blades and there are dark blades, and he realises that this must be one of the god blades, which are long forgotten, long lost. Nobody in living memory basically has ever even seen one. He thinks of his sister, who he'd mentioned really early on in the chapter, like one of the first things, like first page or so, he brought her name up in his memory. He pictures her, seeing that she would be disappointed in him, and then he turns the blade on himself and pushes it through his own heart, and that's where the chapter finishes. So a little bit unexpected, definitely. Some interesting elements in there. I felt for the first half of quite the long opening chapter in comparison to all the others that nothing was really happening. They were just in the mine, but there's always that kind of thing there. It's always that dwarven, they dug too deep kind of thing in the back of your mind whenever you have mining in fantasy and you go down deep into the earth. There's always something there. You go too deep and you realise, I'm too deep and now we're deep in trouble. So that's kind of what you get here, but through a very different means. Definitely an intriguing one, and it's another one that I do have, I believe, on my 2024 list and will be looking to read in full at some point soon. I've got 2 books left. So this one is the Erkenblood by H. Ferry, and we'll see what this one's like. So there's a bit going on in this one, but also at the same time not really anything going on in it. We have a bit of a confusing, potentially, opening whereby, from what I remember reading the synopsis, if you've read that first, you'll probably have that clue of what's going on. But you have a young lady who is, it sounds like it might be under curfew, but it's certainly late at night. She's slinking through parts of the city. Basically, she goes to meet someone, she buys some sort of potion and takes it, and she can feel her power dispersing. So there's a bit there that I'll mention in a moment. She's then returning home from there, and she's accosted by these sapphire soldiers, these the city guard basically, and she's basically, she has no choice because it's them. She has to stop and be searched basically. And there's a general who shows up, and she knows who he is because he's the only general in the city. He joins in the search basically, and he's looking at her, and he looks in her eye, and she realises that she's not looked away in time, or not lowered her eyes in time, and he would be able to potentially see the emerald green in her eye, and that would note her as an Erkenblood of the title, and that's a bad thing. However, he lets her go, but he tells her that he knows what she is basically, and he shouldn't let her go, but he still lets her go. So that's unusual. I've no idea why that would be, but there you go, and she doesn't understand either. She then goes home and she meets with another girl, and they're obviously good friends, and their mentor is there who's teaching them. They obviously have power, because this girl has something called a gleamstone, and she's floating it, she's levitating it in the air in front of her. They're really excited because the next day they're going on a pilgrimage, but because of this nighttime jaunt and the other girl taking this gleamstone outside, they're obviously hiding or keeping their magic hidden at least. their mentor is upset with them. He takes the papers, which presumably would have been like travel papers, to allow them on this pilgrimage, and he tears them up, and they're really upset about this. So not too much happens in there. There was one bit that I liked that kind of explains a bit of this though, which is she took a moment to swallow the anger squeezing her heart. It wasn't like she had chosen this life, to be born a wielder, to suffer from power lust, to live in a land where her mere existence was a crime. So by the sounds of it, if you have magic, or at least if you have this power lust that was mentioned, you're a criminal basically. They're obviously trying to stamp that out. So yeah, not sure what's going to happen next, but I'll find out at some point when I eventually get to that one. This is the last book in the collection, book number 28 for my opening chapter reads. This is Bones to the Wind by Tatiana Obi, one of the authors who joined me in writing a short story for the advent of winter. So I've read literally just that one piece by this author, and I'm going to sample the first chapter, which is confusing a little bit because it says chapter 1, 0. So I'm not sure if that's a name or a number. It does come up again later on as a chapter sort of title, so I'm going to go with it's a name. Maybe I'll find out in a moment. This last book had not a lot happening in this opening chapter, and not too much for me to talk about, to be honest with you. There seems to be some sort of test where they have bones, and they're turning the bones basically. It's like casting the bones. What's more interesting about this one though is some of the world that you've got in here. There's this giant dragon skeleton, which is so big it's described as spreading from one end of the land to the other. The crater of its jaw, there's a lake in there, and the arena where they're throwing the bones is in the sort of the curvature of the tail. So there's obviously some history that's in there. There's lots of talk of the bones. They're going through the desert looking for them and so forth. There's talk of a wind ship that they're going to take out, which sounds quite interesting, and I think is maybe what's on this pretty cool cover. But there's not really too much that happens. There's just the introduction of a couple of characters, a bit of animosity. There's a runt he's described of who had some sort of like wasting disease potentially a few years ago, and he's also different because he's got golden eyes, which denote him as like a magic user, and he, you know, there's no hiding that. They're very plain to see, 'cause basically no one has these golden eyes. So there's a bit of animosity where she bumps into this runt, as he's called, and someone comes to his rescue, and there's words said on either side, but yeah, not really too much said. It's quite a short opening chapter. I don't know why it's called O. It's not mentioned anywhere. There's no character by that name, so I don't know. Tatiana, tell me, why is it O? What's O all about? But yeah, that one certainly didn't have as much oomph as some of the other opening chapters, but still had some interesting elements to it. So there we go, that's 28 over the last 5 videos, 2 days for me, 28 opening chapters that I have read. I have no idea when I'm going to get to any or all of these books, except for the one that I've already put on my August TBR, which is Demon's Reign by Bengali and David Estes. Some of these, though, I'm really intrigued by the opening of them, so it really helps me to move them forward, perhaps, in my TBR, and look to get to them a little bit quicker, which is one of the things that I do enjoy about this, because it really does help me to get an idea about the story, but also the writing and the writing style of the author, and to build my my engagement with the book, basically to build my excitement to pick it up. So if you've been watching these videos over the course of the past week, thank you very much for joining me on this journey. Let me know in the comments down below, whether it's for today or for any of the other days, which of these books really sang out to you. Which do you think I might enjoy? Which do you think you might enjoy picking up and checking out for yourself? I'll hopefully see you in the next video sometime soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.